What would you do if the person you loved betrayed you in front of the world? When Julia humiliates her husband, Vincent, at their anniversary party, she thinks she's won. But Vincent has a plan, one that will turn the tables in ways no one could predict. Who will have the last laugh? The grand ballroom of the Regal Horizon Hotel shimmered under the glow of 1,000 crystal chandeliers. The air was thick with the hum of laughter, clinking glasses, and the soft strains of a string quartet. It was a night of celebration, Vincent and Julia's 10th wedding anniversary. The guest list read like a who's who of the city's elite. Business moguls, politicians, and celebrities mingled effortlessly, their champagne flutes catching the light as they toasted the couple. Vincent stood near the bar, his tailored suit fitting him like a second skin. He exchanged pleasantries with a group of colleagues, his smile easy but his eyes distant. Across the room, Julia moved like a queen among her subjects. Her emerald green gown hugged her figure perfectly, and her laughter rang out, drawing admirers like moths to a flame. She was radiant, magnetic, everything Vincent had fallen in love with a decade ago. But something felt off. Vincent couldn't shake the unease that had been gnawing at him for weeks. Julia had been distant, her smiles a little too practiced, her words a little too sharp. He chalked it up to stress. Her high-powered job as a corporate lawyer was demanding, after all. But tonight, her energy was different. There was a glint in her eye, a tension in her posture that set his nerves on edge. The MC tapped the microphone, silencing the room. Ladies and gentlemen, it's time to hear from the woman of the hour, Julia Emery. The crowd erupted in applause as Julia ascended the stage, her heels clicking against the polished wood. She took the microphone, her smile dazzling. "Thank you all for being here tonight," she began, her voice smooth and confident. 10 years of marriage is a milestone, and I'm so grateful to share it with all of you. Vincent's chest swelled with pride as he watched her. Despite his lingering unease, he couldn't help but admire her poise, her strength. She was everything he wasn't: charismatic, fearless, unshakable. But then her tone shifted. "But tonight," she continued, her voice dropping slightly, "I want to be honest, truly honest." The room grew still, the air thickening with anticipation. Vincent's stomach tightened as he met her gaze. Her eyes, once warm, were now cold and calculating. "Vincent," she said, her voice steady, "you've been my partner for 10 years, but behind closed doors, that partnership has been a lie." Gasps rippled through the crowd. Vincent's heart pounded as she continued, her words slicing through him like a knife. "You've betrayed me in ways I never thought possible. The affairs, the lies, the financial secrets. I've kept silent for too long. But no more." She paused, her eyes locking onto his. "Tonight, I'm taking back my power." The room erupted in murmurs, heads turning toward Vincent. He stood frozen, his mind racing. This couldn't be happening. Not here. Not now. Julia's accusations were a mix of truth and fabrication, twisted into a narrative that painted him as the villain. He wanted to protest, to defend himself, but the weight of the crowd's judgment pinned him in place. Julia stepped down from the stage, the crowd parting like the Red Sea as she walked toward the exit. She didn't look back. Vincent's world tilted on its axis as the whispers grew louder, the stares more piercing. He felt exposed, raw, as if the floor had been ripped out from under him. But as the shock began to fade, something else took its place. A quiet, simmering resolve. Julia had played her hand, but the game was far from over. Vincent straightened his tie, his jaw tightening. If she wanted a war, he would give her one. The night that began as a celebration ended in chaos, and Vincent Emery was no longer the man he'd been just an hour ago. He was something else now, something dangerous. The days following the anniversary party were a blur of silence and speculation. Vincent Emery had vanished from public view, leaving behind a vacuum of unanswered questions. The media feasted on the scandal, headlines screaming, "Power couple crumbles. Julia Emery exposes husband's dark secrets." Paparazzi camped outside their home, desperate for a glimpse of the disgraced husband. But Vincent was nowhere to be found. Behind the scenes, Vincent was far from idle. He had retreated to a secluded cabin in the woods, a property he'd purchased years ago under an alias. The cabin was modest but equipped with everything he needed: high-speed internet, a secure phone line, and a stack of burner phones. It was here, surrounded by the quiet hum of nature, that Vincent began to plot his next move. His first call was to Ethan Cole, a former college roommate and tech genius who had made a fortune in cybersecurity. Ethan answered on the second ring. "Vincent? Jesus, man, I saw the news. Are you okay?" "I've been better," Vincent replied, his voice steady. "I need your help, Ethan. Julia's playing dirty, and I'm not going down without a fight." There was a pause on the other end. "What do you need?" "Access to her stuff. Emails, bank records, phone logs, whatever you can dig up on Julia. She's hiding something, and I need to know what it is." Ethan hesitated. "You know this could get messy, right? If she's as connected as you say, she'll have layers of protection." "I'm counting on it," Vincent said, his tone grim. "But I also know you're the best at what you do. Name your price." Ethan chuckled dryly. "You always did know how to motivate me. Give me 24 hours. Next, Vincent reached out to Claire Rivers, a private investigator with a reputation for discretion and results. Claire had helped him years ago with a sensitive corporate matter, and he trusted her instincts. "Claire, it's Vincent Emery," he said when she picked up. "Vincent," Claire replied, her voice calm but curious. "I was wondering when I'd hear from you. What's the job?" "I need you to dig into Julia's past. Her work, her relationships, her finances. There's something she's hiding, and I need to find it before she destroys me." Claire didn't ask questions. She simply said, "I'll get started right away." With his team in place, Vincent began to piece together his strategy. He knew Julia well. She was meticulous, calculating, and always 2 steps ahead. But she was also arrogant. She'd underestimated him, and that was her mistake. Over the next few days, Ethan and Claire delivered. Ethan uncovered a trail of encrypted emails between Julia and a high-profile client, detailing a scheme to embezzle funds from their law firm. Claire, meanwhile, discovered evidence of a secret affair with Daniel Hart, a powerful real estate developer with ties to organized crime. Vincent sat at the cabin's wooden table, surrounded by printouts and notes. The pieces were coming together, painting a picture of Julia's double life. She hadn't just betrayed him. She'd been living a lie for years. But Vincent wasn't interested in exposing her just yet. He needed to be strategic to strike when she least expected it. He spent hours poring over the evidence, identifying weak points and potential allies. He reached out to a few trusted contacts, planting seeds of doubt about Julia's integrity. One evening, as the sun dipped below the trees, Vincent received a call from Claire. "I found something," she said, her voice tinged with excitement. "A shell company Julia set up overseas. It's been funneling money for years, but the paper trail leads back to Daniel Hart. If we can connect the dots, we can take them both down." Vincent smiled. "Send me everything." As he hung up, he felt a surge of determination. Julia had tried to destroy him, but she'd only awakened a side of him she'd never seen. Vincent Emery wasn't just a husband or a businessman. He was a strategist, a survivor, and he was just getting started. The quiet of the cabin was no longer a retreat. It was a war room. Vincent's mind raced with possibilities, his resolve hardening with each passing hour. Julia had played her hand, but the game was far from over. And this time, Vincent held the cards. The first leak hit the internet like a thunderclap. An anonymous tipster sent a dossier to the Daily Chronicle, one of the city's most respected newspapers. The dossier contained a series of encrypted emails between Julia Emery and Daniel Hart, detailing their plan to siphon millions from Hart's real estate projects into offshore accounts. The emails were damning, filled with coded language and veiled threats. But their meaning was clear. Julia wasn't just complicit. She was the mastermind. The story broke at dawn, and by midday it was everywhere. News anchors dissected the scandal with barely concealed glee, while social media exploded with hashtags like Emery Betrayal and Heart and Soul. Julia's face, once the picture of elegance and power, was now plastered across screens as the poster child for corporate corruption. Julia's office at Emery and Hart law firm was in chaos. Her assistant, Emily, hovered nervously by the door as Julia paced the room, her phone pressed to her ear. "Daniel, we need to contain this," Julia snapped, her voice sharp with panic. "If the media digs any deeper, they'll find everything." Daniel Hart's voice crackled through the line, low and menacing. "You think I don't know that? This is your mess, Julia. You clean it up." Julia's jaw tightened. "Don't you dare pin this on me. We're in this together, remember?" But Daniel had already hung up. Julia threw her phone onto the desk, her hands trembling with rage. She turned to Emily. "Get me our PR team. Now." Meanwhile, Vincent watched the fallout from the safety of his cabin. The television in the corner played a loop of news coverage, each segment more sensational than the last. He sat in a worn leather chair, a cup of coffee cooling in his hands, his expression unreadable. Ethan's voice came through the speakerphone. "The first wave is out. Social media's eating it up. How do you want to play the next move?" Vincent leaned forward, his eyes fixed on the screen. "Hold off for now. Let her sweat. She'll try to spin this, but the more she talks, the deeper she'll dig her own grave." Claire's voice joined the conversation. "I've got more on the shell company. It's called Horizon Holdings, registered in the Cayman Islands. The money trail leads back to Julia, but it's tangled. It'll take time to unravel." "Time is on our side," Vincent said. "Keep digging. I want everything." As the days passed, the pressure on Julia mounted. Her attempts to control the narrative only made things worse. A press conference meant to clear her name backfired when a reporter asked about her relationship with Daniel Hart. Julia's carefully crafted facade cracked, her composure slipping as she snapped, "That's irrelevant." The clip went viral, fueling speculation and ridicule. Memes of her flustered response flooded the internet, and her credibility crumbled further. Behind the scenes, Vincent's allies worked tirelessly. Ethan hacked into Julia's personal accounts, uncovering more evidence of her deceit. Claire followed the money trail, connecting Horizon Holdings to a web of illegal activities. And Vincent, he watched, waited, and planned. One evening, as the sun set behind the trees, Vincent received a call from an unexpected source. Rachel Torres, a junior associate at Emery and Hart. "Mr. Emery?" Rachel's voice was hesitant. I know this is strange, but I need to talk to you. It's about Julia." Vincent's interest was piqued. "Go on." Rachel took a deep breath. "I've seen things. Emails, documents, things that don't add up. I think she's been using the firm to cover her tracks. I can't stay silent anymore." Vincent smiled faintly. "Meet me tomorrow. We'll talk." The next day, Rachel arrived at the cabin, clutching a folder of documents. She handed them to Vincent, her hands shaking. "This is everything I could find. I don't know if it helps, but I thought you should know." Vincent flipped through the papers, his eyes narrowing as he absorbed the information. "This is more than helpful, Rachel. Thank you." As Rachel left, Vincent felt a surge of satisfaction. The noose was tightening around Julia's neck, and she didn't even see it coming. But he wasn't done yet. The following morning, another leak hit the news. This time, it was a recording of a phone call between Julia and Daniel, discussing the transfer of funds to Horizon Holdings. The audio was crystal clear, their voices unmistakable. Julia's world was unraveling, thread by thread. And Vincent, he was the one holding the scissors. The game was far from over, but the tide had turned. Julia had tried to destroy him, but in doing so, she'd awakened a force she couldn't control. And Vincent Emery was just getting started. The city buzzed with anticipation as news spread of an impromptu press conference called by Vincent Emery. It had been weeks since his disappearance, and the public was hungry for answers. Speculation ran wild. Was he going to confess, defend himself, or something else entirely? The venue was a modest conference hall downtown, chosen for its neutrality. By the time Vincent arrived, the room was packed with reporters, cameras, and curious onlookers. The air was thick with tension, the hum of voices falling silent as Vincent stepped onto the stage. He looked different, leaner, harder, his once polished demeanor replaced by a quiet intensity. Dressed in a simple black suit, he carried himself with a calm confidence that commanded attention. The room held its breath as he approached the podium. "Thank you for coming," he began, his voice steady but firm. "I know there's been a lot of speculation about me, about my marriage, and about the accusations made against me. Today, I'm here to set the record straight." He paused, letting his words sink in. The cameras clicked furiously, capturing every moment. "Julia Emery," he continued, his tone hardening, "stood on a stage not unlike this one and accused me of betrayal. She painted herself as the victim and me as the villain. But the truth is far more complicated." He reached into his jacket and pulled out a small remote. With a click, a screen behind him lit up, displaying a series of documents, emails, and photos. "This," he said, pointing to the screen, "is the truth. Julia Emery has been involved in a web of deceit, embezzlement, and corruption for years. These emails, which I've had verified by independent experts, show her conspiring with Daniel Hart to siphon millions from their clients into offshore accounts." The room erupted in gasps and murmurs. Vincent continued, his voice cutting through the noise. "This photo," he said, switching to an image of Julia and Daniel at a secluded resort, "was taken 6 months ago. Their affair wasn't just personal, it was professional. Together, they orchestrated a scheme that defrauded countless people, including many of you in this room." He switched to another document, this one detailing the shell company Horizon Holdings. "This is where the money went. A company registered in the Cayman Islands, controlled by Julia and Daniel. And this," he said, holding up a USB drive, "contains all the evidence. Bank records, phone logs, everything. I'm handing it over to the authorities today." The room was in chaos now, reporters shouting questions, cameras flashing. Vincent raised a hand, silencing them. "I didn't want it to come to this," he said, his voice softer now. "I loved Julia. I trusted her. But when she tried to destroy me, she left me no choice. This isn't about revenge. It's about justice." He stepped back from the podium, his message delivered. The room erupted again, but Vincent didn't stay to answer questions. He walked off the stage, his head held high, and disappeared through a side door. Julia watched the press conference from her office, her face pale, her hands clenched into fists. The screen in front of her replayed Vincent's words, each one a dagger to her carefully constructed world. Her phone rang incessantly. Reporters, colleagues, even her own mother, but she ignored them all. Her mind raced, trying to find a way out, but the walls were closing in. Daniel Hart called, his voice a low growl. "You've got to fix this, Julia. If this blows back on me, you're dead." "I'm working on it," she snapped, but her voice lacked its usual confidence. She tried to rally her team, but the damage was done. The evidence Vincent had presented was irrefutable, and the public sympathy had shifted. Julia Emery, once a respected lawyer and public figure, was now a pariah. Vincent returned to the cabin, the weight of the day settling over him. He poured himself a glass of whiskey and sat by the fire, staring into the flames. Ethan called, his voice filled with admiration. "You did it, man. The whole world's talking about it. Julia's finished." "Not yet," Vincent said quietly. "But she will be." Claire's voice joined the conversation. "The authorities have the evidence. They'll move quickly. Julia and Daniel won't know what hit them." Vincent nodded, though no one could see him. "Good. Let's make sure it sticks." As the fire crackled in the hearth, Vincent allowed himself a moment of satisfaction. He'd played his hand perfectly, exposing Julia's lies and reclaiming his life. But beneath the triumph, there was a lingering emptiness. The reckoning was complete, but the cost had been high. And as the flames danced before him, Vincent couldn't shake the feeling that this was only the beginning. The days following the press conference were a whirlwind of legal battles, media frenzy, and public fallout. Julia Emery's empire crumbled faster than anyone could have predicted. The evidence Vincent had presented was undeniable, and the authorities moved swiftly. Julia and Daniel Hart were arrested on charges of embezzlement, fraud, and conspiracy. Their mugshots splashed across every news outlet, their once glamorous lives reduced to a cautionary tale. Vincent, however, found little solace in their downfall. He returned to the city, stepping back into a life that felt both familiar and foreign. His colleagues welcomed him with open arms, hailing him as a hero for exposing the corruption. But the accolades felt hollow, the congratulations ringing empty in his ears. He moved back into the penthouse he and Julia had shared, now eerily quiet without her presence. The walls seemed to echo with memories, laughter, arguments, moments of tenderness that now felt like a distant dream. Vincent wandered through the rooms, his footsteps heavy, his mind restless. One evening, as he sat on the balcony overlooking the city skyline, his phone buzzed. It was a text from an unknown number. "We need to talk. It's important." Vincent stared at the screen, his chest tightening. He hadn't heard from her since her arrest, and part of him wanted to ignore the message. But curiosity, or perhaps something deeper, got the better of him. The next day, he found himself in the visiting room of the county jail, sitting across from Julia. She looked smaller somehow, her sharp edges softened by the drab prison uniform. Her hair was pulled back, her face free of makeup, and now she looked vulnerable. "Vincent," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Thank you for coming." He nodded, his expression unreadable. "You said it was important." Julia took a deep breath, her hands trembling as she clasped them together. I need you to know that I'm sorry. For everything. I was wrong to hurt you, to lie to you. I was so caught up in my own ambition, my own fear, that I lost sight of what really mattered." Vincent studied her, searching for signs of manipulation. But her eyes were filled with something he hadn't seen in a long time, genuine remorse. "Why now?" he asked, his voice steady. "Why are you telling me this?" "Because I've had a lot of time to think," she said, her voice breaking. "And I realized that the person I hurt the most wasn't you. It was myself. I destroyed everything we had, everything I worked for. And for what? Money? Power? None of it matters now." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his mind racing. He had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed what he would say, how he would make her feel the pain she'd caused him. But now that it was here, he felt none of the satisfaction he'd expected. "What do you want from me, Julia?" he asked finally. She looked down, tears welling in her eyes. "I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I'm sorry, and I need you to let go of the anger. For your sake, not mine." Vincent was silent for a long time, his gaze fixed on her. Finally, he stood, his chair scraping against the floor. "I'll think about it," he said, his tone neutral. As he walked out of the jail, the weight of the encounter settled over him. Julia's words echoed in his mind, stirring emotions he'd tried to bury. He had won. He had exposed her, reclaimed his life, and restored his reputation. But the victory felt empty, the triumph tinged with a sadness he couldn't shake. That night, Vincent sat alone in the penthouse, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He replayed the conversation with Julia, her apology, her tears. He thought about the years they'd shared, the love they'd once had, and the bitterness that had replaced it. And he allowed himself to grieve, not for Julia, but for the life they'd lost. The hollow victory had left him with a choice: to hold on to the anger and let it consume him, or to let it go and find peace. But the decision wouldn't come easily. As the city lights twinkled outside his window, Vincent Emery sat in the silence, grappling with the cost of his revenge and the possibility of redemption. The weeks that followed Vincent's visit to the jail were a blur of introspection and quiet reckoning. He threw himself into his work, rebuilding his career and distancing himself from the scandal that had defined him for so long. But no matter how busy he kept, Julia's words lingered in his mind, a constant undercurrent to his thoughts. One evening, As he sat in his office reviewing contracts, his phone buzzed. It was Claire, the private investigator who had been instrumental in uncovering Julia's secrets. "Vincent, we need to talk," she said, her tone serious. "There's something you need to see." An hour later, Vincent was seated in Claire's office, a stack of documents spread out before him. Claire leaned forward, her expression grave. "I've been digging deeper into Julia's case," she said, "and I found something unexpected." Vincent frowned. "What is it?" Claire handed him a file. "This is a letter Julia wrote to you. She gave it to her lawyer to deliver after her sentencing, but it never made it to you. I think you should read it." Vincent hesitated, then opened the file. The letter was written in Julia's familiar handwriting, the words flowing with a raw honesty that caught him off guard. "Vincent, if you're reading this, it means I've been sentenced, and my fate is sealed. I don't expect you to forgive me. I don't deserve it. But I need you to know that I've had a lot of time to reflect on my choices, and I see now how deeply I hurt you. I was selfish, blinded by ambition and fear, and I destroyed the one person who truly loved me. I'm not asking for anything from you. I just want you to know that I'm sorry, truly sorry. And I hope that one day, you can find peace. You deserve it." Julia. Vincent set the letter down, his chest tight. He looked at Claire, who was watching him carefully. "There's more," she said. "I also found evidence that Julia tried to protect you during the investigation. She refused to implicate you in any of her schemes, even when it could have helped her case. She took full responsibility for everything." Vincent leaned back in his chair, his mind reeling. The Julia in the letter, the Julia who had tried to protect him. It was a side of her he hadn't seen in years. "What do I do with this?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Claire shrugged. "That's up to you. But I think you need to decide what kind of man you want to be. Holding on to the anger might feel justified, but it won't bring you peace. Sometimes, forgiveness is the hardest thing to give, but it's also the most freeing." Vincent left Claire's office that night with the letter in his hand and a weight on his shoulders. He drove to the park where he and Julia had often walked, the place where they'd shared so many quiet moments. He sat on a bench, the letter resting in his lap, and stared at the stars. He allowed himself to remember the good times, the laughter, the love, the dreams they'd shared. He thought about Julia's apology, her attempt to protect him, and the remorse in her eyes. And slowly, something inside him began to shift. The next morning, Vincent made a decision. He contacted Julia's lawyer and arranged a meeting. When he walked into the jail's visiting room, Julia looked up, her eyes wide with surprise. "Vincent," she said, her voice trembling, "I didn't expect to see you again." He sat down across from her, the letter in his hand. "I read your letter," he said, "and I've had a lot of time to think." Julia nodded, her eyes filling with tears. "I meant every word." Vincent took a deep breath. "I'm not going to lie. What you did hurt me more than I can put into words. But holding on to that anger, it's only hurting me more. So, I'm choosing to let it go. Not because you deserve it, but because I do." Julia's tears spilled over, her hands covering her face. "Thank you," she whispered. "Thank you, Vincent." He stood, the weight on his shoulders lifting with each step. "Take care of yourself, Julia." As he walked out of the jail, Vincent felt a sense of peace he hadn't known in years. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but he finally felt free from the anger, the bitterness, the need for revenge. The story of Vincent and Julia Emery was far from perfect, but it was theirs. And in the end, Vincent chose to let it end not with ruin, but with redemption. Revenge may feel sweet, but is it worth the cost? What would you have done in Vincent's place? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks. Subscribe to embrace the journey for more stories like this.